Ryan Wheaton, welcome to the Brand Retro Podcast. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Mike. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, so tell me more about Branding Brews. I will set you up with this, that as a designer, and I've mentioned this in other episodes, but I think as graphic artists, as designers, as creatives, I think we all want to start our own t-shirt line at some point because we just think that would be so fun and so easy. And I think we all want to design like beer labels. We all want to design coffee companies. And just because that's such a trending, cool thing, I think that's something everybody in our space wants to do. Tell me a little bit about how you got started and how you kind of made that happen.
So Branding Brews is a podcast that I had started probably almost 4 years ago now. Actually, I think it probably was 4 years ago.
Yeah, I saw you had some pretty good history with it. It looked like you'd been recording for a while.
Yeah, I did. Thank you. It was a lot of fun. I kind of have taken a little bit of a hiatus from it, just not necessarily planned. I think that goes that way sometimes. But so that's the podcast I have going. The main business that I do with beer branding and design work is Craft Brew Creative. So the kind of story of that really is I've been an avid craft beer fan and drinker and stuff for 20 plus years. The craft beer industry is kind of it's an interesting one. People in the craft beer industry kind of are a little bit of like kind of like punk rockers, and that they kind of go against the society's kind of norm. They go against the big beer. I think of like Budweiser or Coors or something like that. And so this kind of had like this indie culture that was this like group of craft beer drinkers. And they were all very scrappy. They all started brewing in their garage or in their basements, and then some of them became professional and started, opened up a brewery. And but it was all very scrappy. And along with that came a lot of packaging design, a lot of beer labels and logos and stuff like that. They were just really pretty terrible, just to be frank with it, right? They were just lots of like Photoshop gradients and like drop shadows and clip art, and like rivers and dogs and I don't know. It's just so. But being such an avid craft beer fan and then love craft beer because there's so many different flavors you can get and different styles and different countries of origin and all this stuff that goes into it, so deep. Yet, and there was such a big boom of craft beer in the U.S. But from the branding side, it was just falling so short. And I was in this, I've been a graphic designer for my career, basically for my whole adult life. And I was in this job where I was a creative director for a marketing agency. And it was fun. I enjoyed it. I worked with some cool clients, some cool, like bigger, national clients, stuff like that. But I got into this position where I found myself just not necessarily loving the work that I was doing. And really just wasn't gelling well with it anymore. Well, it's like listening to all these different design podcasts and these like business podcasts and stuff like that. And I ran into this one guy who's talking about finding your niche and and going down that and making that your passion. And it's like, well, damn, this is probably like my style aesthetically fit well with the beer industry. And I was like, man, maybe this should just be my niche. I started Craft Brew Creative was originally a design blog. And I was reviewing different packaging designs and just posting about all this different stuff that was going on with cool beer design that I was seeing out there. Yeah, eventually I just started working. I picked up a brewery client, and then that turned into 2, and that turned into 3. And I started doing beer branding seminars in Portland, Oregon. And then I did a beer branding seminars for the nationwide Brewers Conference in Denver, and then I started doing these different seminars, and I started the podcast, and that's kind of just the history of it. And that's basically become my main business now.
Yeah, well, kudos to you for identifying the niche first of all, and then also for taking the leap of going after it, because I think you're right. I think that the craft brewing kind of creative, that movement, whatever you want to call it, it has a punk feel to it. I would even say it's got kind of a skateboard vibe to it. And I mean, I'm in the upper Midwest, but like the craft brewers and the different, independents around here, even when you go to the liquor store and you look at like what's out there for craft beers, like they clearly stand out amongst the more traditional domestic beers. And I know they're different and I get why they do it, but I think that heightened creative and that kind of that self-awareness that they're going to brand themselves independently and be really fun with it, I think really sets it apart as well, because it's part of the experience.
Yeah, I grew up skateboarding and snowboarding, and that was actually what got me into design. Was I wasn't going to become a pro skater or snowboarder, so I was like, well, maybe I can become a designer of like snowboard stuff. And when you're young, you always have these like hopes and stuff like that. And once you actually grow up and go through college or something like that, you realize that you have to shift ideas, many times. But yeah, I landed in the beer industry, and I'm stoked with it.
So tell me a little bit about, the time you've spent and kind of how you've built it to what it is. Because I think that, doing what you're doing as far as the educational standpoint, the podcast, going to these seminars and kind of teaching and mentoring, so to speak, on what that process looks like has got to be like a huge weight lifted off the shoulder of some of these entrepreneurs that are trying to start their own labels, trying to start their own craft beer company. So are you working with like independents that are more about the distribution side, or are you working more independently with those that just maybe have an on-site or a storefront?
They really range a whole spectrum, which is, it's pretty cool actually. I've worked with literally basically home brewers that have large brewing systems that are planning to open a brewery someday soon. A lot of, and so like, yeah, like really like basically somebody in their garage. There's different approaches. Somebody might be opening a brewery, and they if they're lucky, they have money to do it, or if they're lucky, they are able to get some sort of loan and some sort of professional business plan and all these things together. Then there's a step up from that is that maybe there's somebody who's got investors, and so they've all this stuff goes into running any sort of business really. But I've worked with some that have, like I said, literally just starting out of the garage. They don't have a business plan, and they're hoping to open up a brewery someday.
That's got to be super rewarding though, to help them create something that they haven't possibly even yet envisioned for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, these people are super passionate, so it's fun to work with those kind of people for sure. And it's all it's all creativity. It's like it's their craft, so it's cool to have that alignment as well. There's it's kind of interesting. There's all these legalities, right, to starting a brewery that you have to get done before you can actually start a brewery. But there's this beer app called Untapped, and it's like the most popular beer app that's out there, really. And it's mainly it's for craft beer consumers, but it has tools for the breweries themselves to use to market themselves and to create a profile so basically there's these home brewers and like small brewers and that don't have a legal business entity yet, or but they create a brewery, and I'm putting that in quotes. They somehow get onto Untapped, and then like people try their beer and check in their beers, and all of a sudden like they look like an official brewery, but they haven't become like a legal entity yet. So there's this way that like you can start small like that, and you can get everything in check. You can get all the legal stuff done, and you can just go to tasting events. You don't have a brewery, but you can go to a beer festival somewhere, and you can pour your beer and start building a brand and not have a brick and mortar building yet. And that's kind of a cool way to approach it.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually gone to a few tasting type events and festivals and whatnot. And that's what I noticed about it too, is that there are some that are legit brick and mortar. They've got their storefront, they're good to go. Then there's those, like you said, that are still kind of doing it from home, but they're just trying to get their name out there, and they look legit. Like when you walk up to their table and they've got the great branding and the artwork and the banner and the, kind of the table skirt with their logo on it. They look like a legit beer company, which, I mean, I guess technically they are, but it's amazing how, especially in that industry, how they've really adopted that idea and the concept of the power of branding.
Yeah, that cracks me up, man, because I'm just thinking like and you might relate to this, but someone who does design and branding for their work, it's like I have at my fingertips the ability to make any business look like a real brand, and I've started other businesses before, and like they could be completely bootstrapped or like whatever it is, and they could be like whatever, but you make it look super official, and to anybody that walked up to it, be like, oh my gosh, you're like a legit business, or it just the way you brought that up just made me think of that like as a designer or somebody who does branding work, you've got that at your fingertips. And so it's possible some of these businesses, if they're a good friend of theirs does design work, I know I've helped out my buddies before, and so it's having that really good branding work. It is, I guess, another testament just to how important that good branding is, really.
Yeah, and I think it's inherent in the culture of that, the brewers. I know the local breweries that I kind of hit around here, everybody that works for these brewers and these companies are super creative, and some are musicians and some are artists and some are graphic designers. So I think the fact that they attract creatives just increases their chances of finding somebody inside the organization that can help them do stuff like that.
There's lots of that too. I mean, brewers that find talent within the people that are already working there, for sure. I mean, partially to save money, but partially also to promote within. One of the episodes that I did kind of before I slowed down there was interviewing some illustrators that do like comic book illustrations. And I see you've got a collection behind you there. Those of you obviously can't see it because it's the audio format, I'm sure, but Mike's got a big stack of comic books behind him, and this is really cool. But yeah, there was some illustrators, and there's some breweries that they created their brand around the imagery of comics, and then it was really interesting them talking about how craft beer has started to play a role in the comic conferences, and there'll be like a part of the floor, like a beer garden, and there's all these craft breweries, and then all these like comic book fans are just out there drinking beer and checking out the comic conferences and comic cons or whatever. So that's another cool aspect. It's really open to whatever you want it to be. There's breweries that are super modern and super classy and high end, and then there's breweries that are comic based, there's breweries that are skateboard based, there's breweries, it's kind of cool in that sense too.
Yeah, I think the artwork is part of the experience. I know a local brewer here, Drecker Brewing, their can designs are very complex and they're almost complicated to some degree from a design standpoint, but they're so cool that it's part of the process. Like you buy the can or you order that drink and the posters in the facility or whatever it is, but you're just kind of taking that in along with the taste of the beer. And if all those things are kind of working together, it just makes for an overall experience. So that's pretty cool.
It does. Yeah, some people have done some really cool campaigns in regards to like beer releases, and they've gone beyond just making it like a label. They've connected it to these other things, like maybe they connected it to an event or to whatever, and they've made it like a full campaign. Really, there's another podcast out there that if people are interested in this stuff should really check out, and it's called 16 Ounce Canvas, and it's this guy's been doing it for a long time, and he's basically, it's only interviews with designers that are in the beer industry. Yeah, it's really cool. He's been going at it for a while, and I think he's been doing a really good job. I mean, so basically, the name explains it all. So I can give a little background onto how can art has become such a crazy thing.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you something about that anyway. So
they're perfect segue. Okay, so what has really driven the artwork in craft beer as one, but also really the beer industry and business too, is that there's been the advent of the invent of like mobile canning systems. And what these are basically, it's a van. There's a brand called the Can Van, but it's a van and it has an entire canning line in the van. So what they do is you can be a brewery, possibly out in the rural areas that you might be an hour or two from any sort of like close civilization, like, or other cities, with population. And this van can drive up to your brewery, open up their doors, unload a canning line, hook up their line up to your big beer tanks, and pump it through their system. And when they're done, you've got a pallet full of these cans. So canning lines, in the past, cans became popular in the craft beer scene when before it was all bottles. So it was common for large, medium to large size breweries to have bottling lines. And we're talking manufacturing here, so you got to think like most, a lot of smaller businesses don't have this kind of capital or this kind of capability of having a full on manufacturing facility where they have a bottling line or they have a canning line. So anyway, cans at one point became popular before it was all bottles. And then these mobile canners came into play. So now every brewery that can brew beer has the capability of having cans and having cans out on retail shelves. On these canning lines, most people, when you think of like a can, if you're thinking of like Miller Lite, or if you're thinking of Coca-Cola or Pepsi or Mountain Dew or whatever, right? Those are huge quantities, and they're printing them directly to the aluminum, directly to the can. But with these mobile canners, like they're doing a run of like sometimes 1,000 beers. Right. And so it's very small quantities. So alongside of this came this rise in, they call them pressure sensitive labels. And they're basically just a white sticker, rectangular sticker. And you design the label on that, and it goes through the canning line. And then that label applicator just wraps that sticker around the can. So that's, basically from that point on, it was like game on, man, and when I started getting into the industry, like, as I mentioned, I got into it because the design work kind of like sucked. And I found that like no designers were really marketing themselves. There was very few designers or agencies that were marketing themselves as like craft beer branding agencies or craft beer designers. But once this opened up, they could hire their nephew or whatever that's, in design school, and like, here's the 16-ounce canvas, right? It's 5 inches tall by 8 inches wide, and do whatever you want and just make sure it passes like the legal requirements. And then from there, like, it just went crazy, man. Like, all this artwork, it's like you got these crazy like abstract, you've got, like I said, comic book stuff, you've got, it kind of created this like fandom and like this like people that like they're looking for the next cool artwork, and it's really created this whole buzz and really kind of boomed the whole craft beer industry.
That's so awesome. And you mentioned the kind of the process of the bottling, canning, whatever it is. So back in the day, and I'm sure everybody's done this as well, but I have a home kit, and I've had batches, and probably harvested a couple hundred to maybe 200 to 300 bottles in a batch, because I had a couple batches going. And yeah, to bottle all those and to put labels on them and just to do everything, it's a lot of work. And it was fun. I mean, and I'm not opposed to even doing it again at some point, but it definitely opened up my eyes as to how much work it is, especially if you're doing it manual like that. So like you were talking about, a van that shows up and hooks up to your equipment. It's like, man, that would be so much easier. But yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that even existed. Is that mainly out like in the, Portland, Oregon type area? I've never heard of that.
Yeah. It's pretty much everywhere. It started in the bigger cities, but these people, these canning companies have grown their businesses and expanded their footprint. So if you are in a rural area and you are, maybe like an hour or two from a decent sized city, there's a good chance that they'll come out, and can some beer for you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to look into that. So what is your, like, how far have you gone with the designs you're doing? Is it mainly West Coast stuff, or kind of where's your reach been as far as your designs and how far they've gone?
Yeah. Well, I have worked with breweries all over the US and into Canada. I've had inquiries from some breweries in other countries, just haven't, that hasn't come to light, but Alberta, Canada, the East Coast, Maryland. I worked with a canning company in Texas, Colorado. I mean, just all over. I mean, some of the larger breweries that I've worked with would be like Anderson Valley Brewing Company, and they are West Coast based, but they do have beers that are distributed nationwide. And I've also worked with a brewery from the West Coast called Ninkasi. They also distribute pretty far as well. So it really ranges a lot. But I wouldn't say that I've had any like kind of blockbuster labels that, that anybody from your audience might have seen. Chances are probably not. But that's what a lot of these a lot of these breweries are small mom and pop breweries. And I wish I had the statistics in front of me, but I can kind of give you a general idea. So there's the Brewers Association. They're the kind of like the nationwide group that does all the stuff in the beer industry in regards to legal stuff and just it's like a union kind of association. And they did like a study, and so there's probably about 9,000 breweries out there now. And about like 8 or 10 years ago, that number was probably closer to like 3,000 to 4,000 or so. Like it's really boomed a lot. They did some sort of numbers, and it was like 85% of those breweries are doing like less, like they're very small. I'm trying to relate it. So they measure the performance of a brewery on the number of barrels they produce, and like a barrel is a certain amount of kegs, which breaks down to a certain number of beers. But so a barrel is kind of like the master measurement of like the amount of liquid, and I don't have the number off the top of my head, but basically 85% of them, which is like 7,000 or more, are these very small mom and pop type breweries. Like if you think of like a coffee shop, like a neighborhood coffee shop, like this, sometimes that's literally the size of a lot of these breweries. Is that so?
So what's your favorite one you've done? Like and even if you want to share the artwork, we can put it in some of the social posts. But what's your favorite one you've done?
Oh, cool. A lot of them have been really fun. Like I said, that just because sometimes it can be such an open thing, and the breweries are really in an effort to. It's such a competitive market to try to like gain interest, because like everything needs to be like witty or funny or like clever, or some way so that like you're gaining drinkers' interest in it. It's kind of become just like this game. So everything has to have like a cool theme or at least some sort of unique name to it, and then just making that a design around that unique theme or name is really fun. I mean, I think some of my favorite work that I've done for a couple of reasons was there was a brand that was in the Bay Area, California. They're no longer around, but they were called Cleophas Quayle. Funky name, but they did all like wooden barrel aged beers, and they put them all into 750 milliliter bottles, so basically like wine bottles. And as somebody who cranks out can labels all the time, that was really a nice kind of break. And it was a cool mix because it was a design that was kind of high end looking because it's on like a nice big glass bottle. But the way that the label system worked was there was a kind of a little window in the center of the label that was in the shape of their logo, but it was just like an open window. And inside of that window was kind of just like this little spot where you can do anything. So we came up with really fun names and themes, like playing on like famous like 80s like song lyrics and stuff like that, and turning that into some sort of like visual way of representing that. And it was cool because like I said, like the whole design of the label was like custom die cut, and like it was on this bottle and it looked really classy and it looked really high end. But then you take a look at this little window in the center and there's just like this kind of crazy artwork, but it all fit together, and it was kind of incredible how the system worked to where it looked classy, but you had this opportunity to make them really fun and crazy at the same time. So I think that's probably my favorite.
Are you part of that creative process then, or do they come to you with a concept and they say, here's kind of what we're thinking, what can you do with it?
Sure. I do collaborate here and there, but a lot of this stuff, it's really kind of works better in-house for the breweries, just because they're joking around with each other, during brew days or whatever, and there's inside jokes that the team might have. Or maybe it's like there's a favorite 80s song that the whole crew loves, and they're like, man, we got to turn this into a beer somehow, or whatever that might be. So I help from time to time into naming and theming stuff, but a lot of this really is kind of shopped at the brewery itself, because it just, the nature of that I think just works better.
Right. There's probably a lot of inside jokes and stuff by the time they get to you that
Yeah,
are inherent in kind of that brewing process and why it's named what it's named and all that good stuff.
exactly. Yeah, and so sometimes they'll drop like little Easter eggs on the label, like if you might find it, or if you know the inside joke, you might catch it, kind of a thing.
How's the future look for all this? Do you feel like the bubble is ready to burst? Do you feel like it's just getting started? I mean, we're usually a little slow to the party in the Midwest anyway, but I know around here, little breweries and little craft beer places are popping up left and right. And I would say that's everywhere from Fargo, North Dakota to Minneapolis. I mean, they seem to be popping up everywhere.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think this is one that, like, if you're in the beer industry, has been asked over and over again for the last, 6, 7, or 8 years. Because every year there's a kind of, this continual growth, and everyone's like, when is it going to bust, or whatever. The way I see it, I think I don't think it's going to stop. Technically speaking, I think it's plateaued, and I think it's maybe even declined a little bit. And that's for a number of reasons. There's the health aspect. There's been the introduction and pretty rapid growth of seltzers, right? Hard seltzers. And that's because, the health factor. And there have been some breweries out there that have come out to do non-alcoholic beers or very low calorie beers. And those are gaining some growth as well. So that's taking some chunk out of the market because of the health aspect. But that aside, it's become harder and harder and more competitive for smaller breweries to make a name for themselves, just because, a small brewery, might crank out 25 to 30 different beer labels a year, right? So you take that times 8,000, right? That's a ton of beers coming out every year. But from a drinker's perspective, from a customer's perspective, it's fun and it's exciting. And so back in the day, like a brewery used to have their flagship beers. So they would have 5 or 6 beers that they would make, and they would make them on a regular basis. And if you went to that brewery, like, you're like, oh, you really got to try their amber ale. And like, that was what they had. But nowadays, it's become this machine where if you're not cranking out a new beer, like, no one's trying the same beer twice, because like there's another beer out there that you want to try, and so that's the way it's become. You gotta kind of have to like look at that whole thing as like an ecosystem. Long-winded response there, but so I basically think there's going to be continual room for new breweries to come. I think the expectations are, I think people are needed to be aware that they may not become the next large U.S. brewery, or like they call them regional breweries. You may not become the next Fat Tire or New Belgium. You may not become, the next like Sam Adams or whatever. But there's plenty of room for someone who wants to start a business as a neighborhood brewery that's going to create an awesome community, who's going to touch a lot of lives, who's going to create jobs, and be a part of their community. There's plenty of room for that. And even those people in this competitive market that are doing that are going on to open up 2, 3, 4 breweries and having a little network of breweries and are getting some growth. And another aspect to that is also there's a beer delivery app called Drizzly. And I think it was just acquired by Uber. There are these delivery options, and especially with COVID, right? There are beer delivery apps in some states it's not legal, so that's a limiting factor. But in regards to distributing your beer to places that you maybe not have been able to before, that is a whole new area that's growing right now that might allow a smaller brewery to get their beers out in a much larger footprint, which is a possibility for growth that we haven't really seen yet.
No, I think that's a great answer, because I would say locally, and even from, like I said, from here to Minneapolis or even as far as Milwaukee, there are so many of those community-based breweries that, I mean, they might distribute somewhat locally and regionally, but their bread and butter and their staple corner of their business is that repeat customer. It's almost to position themselves as a destination within, that community or that, city that they're in, because they have such a cool environment, and they just do such a good job with their customer service that anybody says that, hey, if you get to Minneapolis, you got to go to this brewery. Or I think that almost like that commercial travel destination type thing is really working in their favor as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that brings up a few points. Yeah, they call them they call it sometimes like a third space, right? So you've got your home, you've got work, and then that's your third space, you know. So that's kind of a thing that that's used around the beer brewery tap room kind of like marketing angles. But there's also like the destination thing. You know, there are breweries that are like out in the mountains, you know, that might be out of the city, but they get people just going out there all the time just because they want to get out of the city. You know, so it's a destination thing for sure. And then the last thing on that point of what you were just talking about is that before COVID came, a lot of breweries and part of their expansion was based on pouring beer out of their tap room, out of their taps, and not putting beer in cans because you can make, oh man, I don't know, it's like 600-700% more on selling a beer on draft out of your tap room in your brewery than you than you would if you put it into a can and sell it through distribution. So it was really kind of a boom and kind of like a cash cow thing of opening up tap rooms and selling beer off your draft lines in the tap room, because all that money is going back in your pocket. It's not going into a distributor. It's not going to canning and all that stuff like that. But when COVID came, you couldn't have people come into your tap room, and then everybody was scrambling to put beer in cans and sell it. So,
right, yeah, because they needed something to get out the door and to keep those customers loyal. Yeah. I mean, I won't name names, but even some locals here did that, where they actually didn't really distribute the canned version or the bottled version until COVID hit, and then that was their scramble. They scrambled to get it in cans so that they could have a weekly pickup. And then they even engineered it so that they were having weekly launch parties of certain new flavors, and they would only release so many cans. And like they really spun it in their favor, but obviously it was kind of a counter reaction to what was going on with COVID and the shutdowns and all that good stuff.
Yeah, it was kind of it was a white knuckle time, you know, for everybody. You know, just restaurants and all businesses, you know, that like couldn't have people come into their doors anymore. But it was really kind of cool to see what kind of interesting things people did to keep things moving. And when I was in, I no longer live in Portland, but when I was in Portland, it was cool just to watch everybody and see what they did. And you'd see people that from day one just were jumping on it, and it's like, you know, we're going to make this happen. We're going to start delivering beers. We're posting about it on social media. And it was literally like a day by day thing because, you know, regulations might change or whatever, but they were like, you know, gosh darn it, we're going to make this happen. And seeing those people with their drive and their passion, and, you know, they were posting pictures every day of them at somebody else's door, knocking on the door with like a 4-pack, being like, here's your delivery, and like letting people know that they were out there delivering beer and they were doing it in a safe way. You know, they were like sanitizing and they were wearing masks and they were doing all these like, you know, and I think it was neat. You know, it's obviously, it's sad and it's hard, and a lot of breweries have shut down, and a lot of people have lost jobs, and it's been a real struggle to maintain. But it's been to some degree encouraging, and seeing how people have handled it and how people have come together to support each other and those kind of things.
Yeah, in many ways it's been inspiring, even though, like you said, it's sad because you see a lot of these businesses struggle, and some of them that had just started out too, so they never even really got a full chance to do it. And hopefully, who knows, maybe when the dust settles, they can come back and try it again. So Ryan, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to let you go with that, and I really appreciate the time and you coming on and talking. This is very interesting to me because, kind of like I said, as a designer, as a creative, I think it's something we all have on our list.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you'd be open to it, but we should almost do another episode. We'll bring on a couple cans each, and maybe we can break down some designs.
That would be a lot of fun. I'd be super into that. Yeah, I mean, if there's designers that are, you know, listening to this podcast, you know, there's plenty of room still out there for, you know, designers to get into working with breweries. You know, if you listen to this, you kind of probably have an idea now of how many labels that are getting put out there every day. And when I started, like I said, there was, you know, hardly any people out there in the branding and design world for beer. But now, I mean, I kid you not, if you look at almost any designer's portfolio, there's one piece of beer item in there. You know, like and now there's like other agencies out there that are, you know, marketing themselves just specifically on beer. there's plenty of work out there. And I would just say keep going at it. If you want to get into the industry, I would say it's probably not the cash cow. I don't know if you got to be passionate about it, but there's probably
anything niche like that is going to be.
Yeah. There's certain niches out there. We're talking about earlier about finding your niche. There's certain niches out there. So there's those niches out there that you can do that, right? But some of them that you're passionate about just may not be the biggest income earners. But if you're passionate about it, go for it, do it.
Yeah, and I think there's value in kind of that initial sacrifice, because I know, like within the comic book industry and some of these other industries we've done interviews with, there's a buy-in. There's a little bit of a hazing period where you got to get your work out there and you kind of earn that spot, and then after that point, it can be profitable. It can be a good outlet for income. It's a little bit of a grind to get your foot in the door. If you'd like to learn more about CyberDogs, share your thoughts, or even ask a specific question about this episode and/or the brand Retro Mindset, contact me directly at mike@cyberdogsmarketing.com.